from Amy Latta Creations, and we've been talking a lot about hand lettering. We've been learning fonts and doodles, borders, and we're even going to combine all of these things to make super special quilt labels. But in the meantime, we need to talk about markers. When we're learning and practicing, the best place to do that is obviously on paper. My favorite kind of paper to practice on is as smooth as possible. The smoother the better. So I like copy paper that's made for laser printers or a medium weight sketch paper. Any kind of journal or drawing book that you have would be great, or just grab it out of your printer. You can practice with any kind of pencil, pen, or bullet tip marker that you happen to have on hand. But when it's time to work on your fabric, you need something special. Regular markers are water-based, which means if your quilt ever gets washed, it's going to go away. We certainly don't want that. Regular markers that are water-based are also not intended to work well with fabric. Even permanent markers are going to bleed and cause a look that you really don't want on your finished product. So we're going to use something very special. Missouri Star Quilt Company has produced a set of fabric markers that are perfect for what we're doing. They're available in a set of 6 colors, as well as 2 black markers that you can buy as a set, a fine point and a thicker point. As you're using these, keep in mind that they are permanent. That's why I always recommend practicing and planning on paper and then switching to your fabric markers for your fabric project. These are ready to use, and as soon as you've created them, they can be washed. They don't need to be steam or heat set. These are going to be fabulous on your fabric. So let's talk about how we're going to prepare our fabric. We love to craft with it, we love to sew it, but one of the things about fabric is that it moves, and that can be a big problem when it comes to writing on fabric. So what we want to do is secure it. One way that I like to do this is I'll take the cardboard piece that comes at the bottom of my fabric and I'll clip the fabric to it. We have these cute little quilting clips, and all I do is I clip one on each side of my square. If you really don't want it to move, you can use even more clips, but I find that 4 usually does the trick. This is going to hold your fabric in place and keep it from moving around or bunching up when you're writing on it. Another tip for the fabric markers has to do with actually when you're not using them. You always want to store these markers horizontally to prolong their life and make sure that you get the most ink as possible. These fabric markers are perfect for all of your quilting projects, and I think you're really going to love them. There's no special technique for using them compared to what we've been doing in practice. They work just like all of the regular markers. They're just designed for fabric. So put those skills to use, and we're going to make those amazing quilt labels that are going to mean so much when you give them away.